161.3 kilometers per hour. That is the fastest a human being has ever propelled a cricket ball in recorded history. Not in a laboratory, not with a machine, with a shoulder joint, a biological structure that evolution never designed for this purpose. The year was 2003. The venue was Newlands, Cape Town. The batter was Nick Knight of England, and the man who released that delivery was a 27-year-old from Rawalpindi, Pakistan, Shoaib Akhtar. That number 161.3 has stood for over 2 decades. No bowler on earth has touched it since. But here is what nobody asked at the time, what nobody asked for 20 years. Not how did he train, not how did he run up, but how did the human shoulder, a joint held together by 4 small muscles and a lattice of connective tissue, generate enough rotational force to accelerate a 156-gram leather ball to a speed that gives a professional batter approximately 0.43 seconds to react? That question has a biological answer, and it is far stranger than anything you have been told. The standard explanation goes like this. Shoaib Akhtar was fast because he was strong, because he trained hard, because he had a long run-up and a powerful action. Coaches point to his muscular frame, his aggressive approach to the crease, his raw athleticism. Sports journalists called it brute force. Former players talked about his natural gift. Every single one of those explanations is incomplete, and one of them is outright wrong. Here is the problem with brute force. Strength, in the conventional sense, is not the primary driver of ball speed in fast bowling. Research published in the Journal of Sports Sciences by Ferdinands, Kirsting, and Marshall found that peak shoulder internal rotation velocity, not raw muscular strength, is the dominant mechanical predictor of bowling pace. You can be the strongest man in the dressing room and still bowl at 120 kilometers per hour if your shoulder cannot rotate at the right speed, in the right sequence, at the precise millisecond the ball leaves your hand. So if it is not brute strength, what is it? And more importantly, why could Shoaib Akhtar do it when thousands of equally strong, equally dedicated fast bowlers across cricket history never came close? What we are going to do in this video is go inside the shoulder, not metaphorically, anatomically, mechanically, at the level of muscle fiber recruitment, tendon elasticity, and neuromuscular firing sequences, because researchers at the University of Western Australia, including Dr. Mark Portis and his colleagues in cricket biomechanics, spent years analyzing high-speed bowling footage frame by frame at 500 frames per second to map exactly what happens in the human body during a fast bowling delivery. What they found rewrites the simple story of pace and power. And separately, sports scientists studying overhead throwing athletes, baseball pitchers, javelin throwers, handball players have identified a specific biological sequence called the proximal to distal kinetic chain. A chain that, when it fires in perfect synchrony, can multiply force at the point of release by a factor that no single muscle group could generate alone. Shoaib Akhtar did not just have a powerful arm. He had a kinetic chain that operated at a level of neuromuscular precision that placed him in a category of biological outliers. And we are going to explain exactly what that means, mechanism by mechanism. Let us start at the beginning, not at the shoulder, at the ground. This is the part that surprises people. The fastest delivery Shoaib Akhtar ever bowled was not primarily generated by his arm. Approximately 54% of the total velocity imparted to the ball originates below his waist. This is not an opinion. This is a biomechanical measurement published by Portis, Mason, Elliott, Fitzner, and done in a 2004 study titled Muscular Contributions to Ball Release Speed in Cricket Fast Bowling. Think of it this way. Imagine a whip, a bullwhip. When a handler cracks a bullwhip, the tip can exceed the speed of sound over 1,200 kilometers per hour. The handler's arm does not move at that speed. The handler's wrist does not move at that speed. What happens is a sequential transfer of energy from a large, slow-moving base, the arm, through progressively smaller and faster segments, the forearm, the wrist, the tip, each segment accelerating because the one before it has decelerated and transferred its momentum forward. The human body during fast bowling is that whip. The whip analogy only works if each segment in the chain fires in the correct sequence and at the correct time. If any segment fires too early, if the shoulder rotates before the hips have fully transferred their momentum, the chain breaks. Energy leaks. Speed is lost. And critically, the forces that were meant to travel through the kinetic chain and out through the ball instead get absorbed by the joint that fired out of sequence. This is why fast bowlers get injured, not because they bowl too fast, but because their kinetic chain misfires and a joint, usually the lower back, the front knee, or the shoulder absorbs forces it was never designed to handle. Now back to the shoulder specifically, because this is where Shoaib Akhtar's biology becomes extraordinary. The shoulder joint, the glenohumeral joint, is a bowland socket structure. The bowel is the head of the humerus. The socket is the glenoid cavity of the scapula. Unlike the hip, which is a deep, stable ball and socket joint, the shoulder socket is remarkably shallow. The glenoid is often described by anatomists as a golf tee. It barely cups the humeral head at all. This is by design. Evolution traded stability for mobility. The shoulder is the most mobile joint in the human body. It can rotate, elevate, abduct, extend, flex, and perform combinations of all of these simultaneously. No other joint approaches this range, but that mobility comes at a cost. The shoulder is held in place almost entirely by soft tissue. The labrum, the joint capsule, the glenohumeral ligaments, and most critically, the rotator cuff. The rotator cuff is not one muscle. It is four: supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis. Together they form a cuff, a dynamic sleeve around the humeral head that both stabilizes the joint and generates the internal rotation that accelerates the arm during throwing. These four muscles collectively are smaller than your quadriceps. They are not power muscles. They are precision muscles, coordination muscles. They are the neural software that tells the shoulder when to fire, how hard, and in what direction. The peak angular velocity of the shoulder during a fast bowling delivery, the speed at which the humerus rotates around its long axis during the final phase of the arm swing, has been measured in elite fast bowlers at approximately 6,000 to 7,500 degrees per second. Let that number land. 7,500 degrees per second. One full rotation is 360 degrees. This means the shoulder is rotating at a rate equivalent to completing more than 20 full rotations every single second, except it does not complete full rotations. It performs one explosive, precisely controlled burst of internal rotation lasting approximately 50 milliseconds, 5/100ths of a second, and in that window, it transfers the accumulated momentum of the entire kinetic chain into the ball. For comparison, fastest shoulder internal rotation ever measured in any human athlete across all throwing sports is approximately 7,500 degrees per second. That figure comes from research on elite baseball pitchers. Elite fast bowlers in cricket operate in the same biological neighborhood. They are among the fastest rotational athletes on Earth. Now let us talk about what happens when that system operates at its absolute limit. Because Shoaib Akhtar was not just operating at the upper range of normal human fast bowling. He was operating at the edge of what the biological structures involved can physically sustain. Here is the sequence of events in a 161.3 km/h delivery, broken down by phase. Phase 1, the run-up and gather. Shoaib Akhtar's run-up was approximately 35 meters, long by modern standards, though not extreme. The purpose of the run-up is not simply to build momentum. Research by Burnett, Elliott, and Marshall showed that approach speed contributes to ball velocity, but the relationship is not linear. There is an optimal run-up speed beyond which additional approach velocity actually disrupts the timing of the kinetic chain. The run-up is a timing mechanism as much as a momentum builder. It is setting the rhythm of the chain before the chain fires. Phase 2, the bound and pre-delivery stride. In the gather, the penultimate stride before delivery, Shoaib Akhtar's body performs something biomechanically critical. The bowling arm begins its backlift. The non-bowling arm extends forward. The trunk begins to coil into a position of maximum counter-rotation, the chest pointing away from the batter. the hips beginning to open while the shoulders remain closed. This coiling creates what sports scientists call separation angle, the angular difference between hip orientation and shoulder orientation at the moment of back foot contact. In elite fast bowlers, this separation angle can reach 40 to 60 degrees. Think of it like winding a spring, the separation between hips and shoulders at back foot contact. The greater the elastic potential energy stored in the trunk musculature, specifically in the obliques, the thoracolumbar fascia, and the erector spinae group. When the hips then drive forward and rotate toward the batter, this stored elastic energy is released and transmitted up the kinetic chain toward the shoulder. This is why Shoaib Akhtar's aggressive, front-on bowling action, which coaches often criticized as technically impure, was not a flaw. It was, for his specific musculoskeletal architecture, a mechanism that generated exceptional trunk rotation velocity. His action was not textbook, but his kinetic chain fired with extraordinary efficiency. Phase 3. Front foot contact and energy transfer. At front foot contact, the moment Shoaib Akhtar's left foot plants on the pitch the ground, reaction force traveling up through his leg is estimated at approximately 6 to 8 times his body weight. His body weight at peak career was approximately 90 kilograms. This means his front leg was absorbing a force equivalent to roughly 540 to 720 kilograms instantaneously in a contact time of less than 100 milliseconds. This is not a metaphor. This is a force plate measurement replicated across multiple studies of fast bowlers. Dr. Simon Feroz and colleagues at Edith Cowan University have documented these ground reaction forces extensively. The front leg in fast bowling functions as a rigid pole, a vaulting mechanism that abruptly decelerates the lower body, forcing all accumulated momentum to transfer upward through the trunk and into the shoulder and arm. If the front knee buckles, if it flexes too much at contact, it absorbs the force rather than transmitting it. Ball speed drops. If the front leg is too rigid, if there is no give at all, the joint impact forces become unsustainable. This is why front knee injuries are endemic among fast bowlers. Shoaib Akhtar's front leg mechanics allowed him to walk this line with unusual precision for extended spells, though not without cost. He underwent multiple knee surgeries throughout his career, and the structural stress on his patella tendon and anterior cruciate ligament was a documented clinical reality. Phase 4. Arm acceleration and shoulder internal rotation. Here is where the shoulder itself becomes the story. After front foot contact, the trunk has begun its explosive rotation toward the batter. The bowling arm, which has been in external rotation, laid back behind the body, now begins its acceleration phase. The humerus transitions from maximum external rotation to explosive internal rotation. This transition is called the arm cocking to acceleration phase, and it is the single most violent joint motion in all of sport. The forces involved are extraordinary. Research by Flessig, Barentine, Escamilla, and Andrews originally conducted on baseball pitchers but validated across overhead throwing. Athletes found that during the arm acceleration phase, the shoulder internal rotators generate torque values of approximately 52 to 80 Newton meters. Simultaneously, the shoulder joint itself experiences distraction forces trying to pull the humeral head out of the glenoid socket of up to 400 newtons. That is roughly the weight of 40 kilograms of mass pulling directly outward on the joint with every single delivery. Now multiply that across a spell of bowling, 10 overs, 60 deliveries at 161 kilometers per hour. The cumulative mechanical load on Shoaib Akhtar's shoulder, knee, and lumbar spine across his career was not just unusual. It was at the boundary of what biological tissue can repeatedly absorb and repair. This is not speculation. His career was defined and ultimately curtailed by the structural consequences of operating these systems at their absolute limit. He bowled at the speed of tissue damage, because the question that emerges from all of this is not just how did he generate that speed? The deeper question is, why didn't every fast bowler who trained as hard, ran as fast, and lifted as heavy achieve the same result? The answer requires going one level deeper, into the tissue itself. Let us talk about what Shoaib Akhtar was born with and what he built. Because the biology of elite fast bowling pace is not a single variable. It is a combination of structural endowment and acquired adaptation that takes years to develop and cannot be fully replicated by training alone. Structural factor 1. Muscle fiber type distribution. Human skeletal muscle contains two primary fiber types. Type 1 fibers slow-twitch are optimized for endurance. They are fatigue-resistant, oxygen-dependent, and generate force slowly but sustainably. Type 2 fibers fast-twitch generate force rapidly and powerfully but fatigue quickly. They are the fibers responsible for explosive, high-velocity movements. Fast bowling is a Type 2 fiber activity. The arm acceleration phase lasts 50 milliseconds. There is no time for slow-twitch oxidative metabolism to contribute meaningfully. What fires the shoulder at 7,500 degrees per second is the rapid synchronized recruitment of fast-twitch motor units in the infraspinatus, subscapularis, and pectoralis major. Research by Simoneau and Bouchard, published in the FASEB journal, demonstrated that fast-twitch to slow-twitch fiber ratio in elite power athletes is substantially genetically determined negative, with heritability estimates between 40 and 65%. Elite sprinters and throwers consistently show fast-twitch fiber percentages in key muscle groups exceeding 60%, sometimes approaching 80%. This is a biological starting point that training can refine but cannot fundamentally alter. You cannot convert slow-twitch fibers to fast-twitch fibers through any training protocol currently known. You can increase the size and oxidative capacity of existing fast-twitch fibers. You can improve the recruitment efficiency. But the ratio is largely set by genetics. Shoaib Akhtar's extraordinary fast-twitch density in his shoulder and trunk musculature was not something he created in a gym. He was born with the hardware. Training gave him the software to use it. Structural factor 2, tendon elasticity and the stretch shortening cycle. Here is something that surprises most people when they first encounter it. A significant portion of the energy that accelerates the ball during fast bowling does not come directly from muscle contraction. It comes from tendons. The stretch shortening cycle, a mechanism documented extensively by researchers including Paavo Komi at the University of Jyväskylä, describes a process by which a tendon is pre-stretched during the eccentric phase of a movement and then releases that stored elastic energy during the concentric phase. Like a compressed spring, the tendon acts as an energy storage and return device. During the arm cocking phase of fast bowling, the shoulder external rotators, primarily infraspinatus, and teres minor are loaded eccentrically as the arm lays back. The tendons of these muscles store elastic strain energy. When the arm transitions to acceleration, that stored energy is released and contributes to the velocity of internal rotation above and beyond what pure muscle contraction alone could generate. The efficiency of this elastic energy return depends critically on tendon stiffness. Stiffer tendons return energy. More rapidly, they release stored elastic energy faster, contributing to higher peak velocities. But stiffer tendons also have less tolerance for sudden overloading. They are more susceptible to acute rupture. Research by Kubo, Kanehisa, and Fukunaga at the University of Tokyo found that elite throwing athletes show significantly greater tendon stiffness in their throwing arm compared to their non-throwing arm, a structural adaptation that develops over years of high-velocity throwing. This symmetry is not a pathology. It is an adaptation. The throwing arm's tendons literally remodel themselves at the structural level in response to repeated high-load stimulus. This remodeling takes years. It cannot be rushed. Attempts to rush it, exposing young bowlers to high-intensity bowling loads before their tendons have completed this adaptive remodeling, is one of the primary mechanisms behind the epidemic of serious shoulder and elbow injuries in junior fast bowlers worldwide. Shoaib Akhtar began bowling seriously in his mid-teens. His shoulder tendons had approximately a decade of progressive loading stimulus before he reached international cricket. By the time he stood at the top of his mark at Newlands in 2003, those tendons had been remodeling for 10 years. They were structurally optimized for exactly this kind of explosive high-velocity loading. Structural factor 3, glenohumeral range of motion adaptation. Elite overhead throwing athletes consistently show a specific pattern of shoulder range of motion asymmetry. The throwing shoulder develops greater external rotation range, sometimes 10 to 20 degrees, more than the non-throwing shoulder, while simultaneously losing internal rotation range. This is called glenohumeral internal rotation deficit, or GIRD. The mechanism behind this was investigated by Burkhart, Morgan, and Kibler and published in Arthroscopy in 2003, the same year Shoaib Akhtar set his record. The posterior shoulder capsule thickens, salve, and tightens in response to repeated throwing loads. The humeral head undergoes a process called retroversion, a slight twisting of the bone itself that increases external rotation range and positions the arm for greater rotational velocity during the acceleration phase. This is bone-level adaptation. The humerus itself changes shape in response to repeated throwing stimulus during the developmental years when bone is still malleable. Once skeletal maturity is reached, typically around age 18, this structural window closes. The adaptations that were possible in adolescence are no longer available. This is why elite fast bowlers almost invariably began bowling in childhood. The structural adaptations that underpin elite pace humeral retroversion, tendon stiffness asymmetry, rotator cuff neuromuscular coordination are built during specific developmental windows. You cannot replicate them in an adult body. And this is where it stops being about Shoaib Akhtar and starts being about something much larger. What Shoaib Akhtar's biology reveals is not a cricket-specific phenomenon. It is a universal law of human biomechanics. And once you understand it, you see it operating everywhere. Call it the kinetic chain multiplier principle. The law states this: in any multi-segment throwing or striking movement, peak velocity at the distal endpoint, the ball, the javelin, the racket head is not determined by the strength of any single segment. It is determined by the precision of sequential energy transfer across all segments, from proximal to distal, with each segment decelerating at the optimal moment to transfer its accumulated momentum to the next. The implication of this law is profound and counterintuitive. A bowler with a more precise kinetic chain, even with less raw muscular strength, will bowl faster than a stronger bowler with a less efficient chain. Strength is a resource. The kinetic chain is the delivery mechanism. A more efficient delivery mechanism extracts more velocity from the same strength resource. This is why elite fast bowlers do not always look like powerlifters. Shoaib Akhtar was muscular, but not extraordinarily so by professional athlete standards. What made him different was not the amount of force his muscles could generate. It was the precision and timing with which that force was sequenced and transferred. The law appears across multiple systems. In baseball pitching, the same proximal to distal sequence governs. Ball velocity. Research by Flessig and colleagues at the American Sports Medicine Institute found that elite Major League Baseball pitchers generate ball release speeds of up to 165 kilometers per hour, comparable to Shoaib Akhtar's record using the identical biomechanical principle. The baseball is lighter than a cricket ball. The bowling action is different, but the kinetic chain law is identical. In javelin throwing, the world record held by Jan Železný at 98.48 meters was achieved. To a throwing action that biomechanical analyses show optimizes kinetic chain sequencing to a degree that has never been replicated in competition. Železny's throwing mechanics was studied extensively by researchers at Charles University in Prague, who found his kinetic chain efficiency, the ratio of energy input to javelin velocity, was measurably superior to other elite javelin throwers, not because he was stronger, but because his sequential energy transfer was more precise. The law also operates in reverse as a failure mode. When the kinetic chain fires out of sequence when a segment activates too early or too late, the consequences are not just reduced velocity, they are injury. The joint that fires out of sequence absorbs forces it was not designed to handle. In fast bowling, premature shoulder rotation before full hip drive completion loads the lumbar spine asymmetrically, and this is the primary mechanism behind the stress fractures of the pars interarticularis that affect an estimated 40% of elite fast bowlers at some point in their careers. 40%. Nearly half of all elite fast bowlers sustain a lumbar stress fracture, not because they are weak, because the forces involved when the kinetic chain is even slightly mistimed are sufficient to cause bone fatigue failure. Shoaib Akhtar was not immune to this. His career was interrupted multiple times by exactly these structural consequences. But the fact that he sustained and recovered from these injuries and continued to operate at world record pace across more than a decade of international cricket speaks to both the resilience of his specific biological architecture and the quality of the structural adaptations his years of bowling had built. So what does all of this mean not for Shoaib Akhtar, but for how we understand human physical performance? This is not a video about how to bow faster. It never was. This is a video about what biological machinery makes extraordinary physical performance possible, and what that machinery tells us about the nature of human movement itself. Here is what you now know that most people, including many coaches, do not. When you watch a fast bowler running in and you think he's generating pace with his arm, you are watching the last 5% of the story. The other 95% happen in the run-up, the gather, the bound, the back foot contact, the coil, the front foot plant, the hip drive, and the trunk rotation, all before the arm even began to accelerate. The arm is the whip's tip. The rest of the body is the whip. When you see a young, fast bowler break down with a stress fracture at age 19, you now understand what actually happened. Their kinetic chain was generating forces that exceeded what their developing biological structures could absorb. It was not a training error in the simple sense. It was a timing error at the neuromuscular level, a chain that was firing with too much force before the connective tissue had completed its years-long adaptive remodeling. When you hear that a bowler lost pace as they aged, you now understand one likely mechanism: not that their muscles weakened, but that the tendon elasticity that contributed meaningfully to their peak velocity had been progressively compromised by repeated microtrauma, reducing the efficiency of the stretch-shortening cycle that had once returned elastic energy so efficiently. Because the kinetic chain principle has an implication that extends far beyond cricket, far beyond sport, and into any human movement that requires the transfer of force across multiple body segments. Every time you throw something, a ball, a stone, a frisbee, your nervous system is attempting to solve the same optimization problem that Shoaib Akhtar's neuromuscular system solved at a world record level. The difference between you and him is not that he had access to a different physical principle. The difference is the precision, the adaptation, and structural hardware with which his system executed that principle. Understanding this does not make you a faster bowler, but it does something more valuable. It changes how you see what you are watching. When 161.3 appeared on that speed gun at Newlands in 2003, the crowd reacted to a number. What they were actually witnessing was a biological system built over 27 years of structural adaptation, genetic endowment, and neuromuscular refinement firing at its absolute upper limit with precision that has never been reproduced in the 2 decades since. That number is not just a record. It is a measurement of what the human shoulder can do when every variable in the kinetic chain aligns at the exact right moment, and when the biological hardware underneath it has spent a lifetime becoming capable of sustaining the forces that moment demands. That is what 161.3 kilometers per hour actually means. But here is the question this video did not answer. If the kinetic chain principle governs pace, and if tendon adaptation and muscle fiber distribution set the upper limit of what any individual can achieve, then what actually happened in the years before Shoaib Akhtar's record delivery? What specific training stimulus, what specific developmental history shaped that kinetic chain into the precise biological instrument it became? We know the mechanism. We do not yet know the full developmental story. And that story, the biology of how elite fast bowling pace is built across the years from adolescence to peak performance, involves a set of neuromuscular adaptation processes that are even less understood by the general public than anything we covered today. In the next video, we are going inside the nervous system itself, not the muscles, not the tendons, the motor neurons, the biological wiring that tells the muscles when to fire, how hard, and in what sequence. Because the difference between a bowler who generates 130 kilometers per hour and one who generates 160 is not always in the muscles. Sometimes it is entirely in the neural drive, the electrical signal, that tells those muscles to contract. And the research on neural drive adaptation in elite athletes reveals something that changes how you think about the entire concept of athletic talent. If you want to understand what actually separates elite performers from the rest of us at the level of the nervous system, subscribe. That is the next video, and it will not be what you expect. If you want to start with the broader framework, how the kinetic chain principle operates across different sports and different biological systems, the video on your screen right now covers exactly that. Watch it next. 161.3 kilometers per hour. Now you know what it actually was.